that highlighted a potential relationship between Sidewinder and ModifiedElephant. Coordination, perhaps, or perhaps some sort of shared mission by an overarching entity, aka the government.
All right, this is the Havoc Podcast. I'm your host, Tom DeQuino. The date is April 1st, 2022, and with us today we have cybersecurity researcher extraordinaire Tom Hegel of SentinelOne's SentinelLabs. Welcome, sir.
Thank you. Thanks, Tom. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Really appreciate you joining us. And I'll have to be honest, half of me thought that you might have just ghosted me on the interview as an April 1st April Fool's Day prank.
Surprise! Yeah.
So maybe it was a prank that you showed up. I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, we'll see.
No, but I really appreciate you coming in and joining me for this. It's a really interesting report that we're going to talk about today. You recently released with SentinelLabs a report called ModifiedElephant APT and a Decade of Fabricating Evidence. So that's what we're going to be diving into. For the listeners, the link to the report will be in the show notes, so you'll be able to go find all the details that we're discussing today there if you haven't already read it. Before we get into all of that, give us a little bit of background on how you got into this enviable yet maybe slightly terrifying role of threat actor research.
That's a great way to describe it. Yeah, absolutely. So I have a background kind of coming from originating in just generic, same old IT work. I did network administration and host-based stuff during high school, and slowly transitioned my career after graduating into really just focusing on the basics, security operations center type work. And my first job was doing security as the only security guy for a small law firm, and from there, I just kind of got hooked on security like many of us do, and have been kind of bouncing around various security vendors and organizations throughout the industry, and just getting my hands in various skill sets of various aspects of the industry, MSSPs, product vendors where I'm now, and every type of product vendor. I'm in an endpoint company now, SentinelOne, but I've been in the SIM side, I've been on the more tip side with Alien Vault and so forth. So really kind of just getting my hands in everything. And that's where I found my love for threat intelligence and adversary tracking and everything that comes along with that domain. And, a lot of what it is today steps really closely into the geopolitical space. So really kind of just found my passion in that. And that's where I ended up at SentinelLabs, the research side of SentinelOne. So we have a lot of the public research coming out of SentinelOne for APT and crimeware research.
That's awesome. Really cool. It's really funny, actually, how so many of us in this industry share really kind of a common story in that way, right? It would, maybe you start off, just doing some IT networking support related stuff, and somehow you find yourself sitting in a SOC one day or investigating some kind of security issue one day, and you're like, next thing you know, you're wearing the security hat. And then it kind of just blossoms from there, right?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I know. Great. When I first got into computers, a lot of it was just a lot of the hardware side. And it's funny how that transitions into security, because it translates so well into the security problems you had back then, like the lockers, the fake AVs and stuff like that. So yeah, good times.
Yeah. Awesome. That's really cool. So let's, I'm going to run through just the executive summary for the report real quick for the folks that haven't actually had an opportunity to read it yet. I think it gives a really nice setup for us to kick off our conversation with. So let me run through that real quick. So that the executive summary says, our research attributes a decade of activity to a threat actor we call ModifiedElephant. ModifiedElephant is responsible for targeted attacks on human rights activists, human rights defenders, academics, and lawyers across India with the objective of planting incriminating digital evidence. ModifiedElephant has been operating since at least 2012 and has repeatedly targeted specific individuals. Modified Elephant operates through the use of commercially available remote access Trojans or rats and has potential ties to the commercial surveillance industry. The last note here, it says a threat actor uses spear phishing with malicious documents to deliver malware such as NetWire, Dark Comet, and simple keyloggers with infrastructure overlaps that allow us to connect long periods of previously unattributed malicious activity. Wow. That's quite a lot. First off, I got to ask, who came up with this name?
That was my colleague and myself, Juan Jags, as a lot of you know him. Kind of came up with the name based off of, Elephant being India and Modified having some ties with, the objective of a lot of what we see this actor doing. So coincidental naming in other means too, but yeah. That was the story behind that.
Yeah, so that the planting incriminating evidence is got it. That makes total sense. Awesome.
Yeah.
Other question that came to mind for me when I was reviewing this was just how do you decide what to investigate as a team? I mean, is it a team vote? Are you pulling names out of a hat? Does somebody in a trench coat pop out of a back closet holding a manila envelope? I mean, give us a scoop on that.
Yeah. Yeah, great question. It's challenging because, people that are working in the threat intelligence space of our industry, we are flooded with an avalanche of opportunity for things to research. So, right. If it's something that we run across in our customer telemetry or something we see pop up on Twitter or just a tip from somebody that we know elsewhere in the industry, those all tend to be good leads. In this case, what happened was we took a particular interest with previous reporting that we did on some Turkish activity unrelated to Modified Elephant. That was, again, targeting activists. And the story behind some of the targeting of activists in India was being referenced in the media as potentially evidence planting and having like a cyber capability to this activity. There were some Washington Post articles and some documentation released by our friends at Arsenal Consulting. And at that point, that kind of struck a chord with us where it's like, hey, this is something that we feel like there's more potential or more of a story to that's not being fully understood. So in that case, it was kind of like, okay, let's take a look at it and see if there's anything interesting there, any more threads to pull. And that's when, the door flew open and the whole story was kind of made for us at that point.
Yeah. So you're just really keeping a pulse on what's going on in the ecosphere and grabbing onto and pulling those threads that just interest you, pique your interest, basically.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And that's something different. Sorry, that's something different for every one of us on our team. When I first joined SentinelLabs, that was one of the first things I kind of jumped on was the opportunity to look into this. However, we have guys that are interested in like the crimeware side, so they would do something similar, but it's like more interest in the crimeware side or certain regions of the world. So for me, it was kind of like, something that really struck a chord, and it felt like a great opportunity to, uncover more interesting details about a threat actor we just don't know of.
Right. Yeah, that's really cool. And SentinelOne is like, how awesome is it for them to just kind of support that instinct you have? Like, hey, this is really something interesting I want to run with. And they're just like, thumbs up, go for it. How does that tend to play out?
Yeah. Yeah. To be honest with you, I'm in an extremely rare and lucky position to be able to pursue pretty much almost any research opportunity I want. We get to publish things without having to tie into a product or be a sales pitch. So we're very lucky to be able to try and make contributions back to the industry and not have that overhead on top of our research as some requirements. So, you look at research going after activists in India, a lot of security vendors were probably trying to avoid that because, it's not really a good sales pitch. They're not selling the product to activists in India. So it's something that they would probably not waste their time on. So I felt very lucky to be able to use our resources for some good for once. So it's a great opportunity.
No doubt. That's really amazing. I love that. Awesome. So I'm going to rattle off one more quote here. There's a background section in the report that I just thought was also just good context for us to include here. So let me give you that. It says our research into these intrusions revealed a decade of persistent malicious activity targeting specific groups and individuals that we now attribute to a previously unknown threat actor named ModifiedElephant. This actor has operated for years, evading research attention. This is a part that I thought was interesting, and detection due to their limited scope of operations, the mundane nature of their tools, and their regionally specific targeting. ModifiedElephant is still active at the time of writing. There's a couple of things in there that jumped out at me. I mean, first off, this is a major attribution, right, with some potentially significant political implications. Is that a safe or fair assessment?
Yeah, it's it's difficult for us to weigh the significance of our research in terms of like real world political impact. Our research is coming from a security vendor in the United States. It's a little different when we're talking about stuff that's happening in India. It's tricky, it's complex, and there's a lot to it. And for our case, there's not a lot of evidence where we're pointing to the exact individual or organization that is responsible. We're basically saying, based off of what we found, the timing of everything, this is in close coordination with the entities behind some of these arrests and state-backed operations and so forth. So, it depends on attribution, like how far you want to go, but it's a very rare case, in my opinion, where we are able to link it to something so accurately that we don't just have to generalize as, hey, this is potentially this government. It's pretty obvious in many cases in this scenario.
Right. You can let people draw their own conclusions and reasonably expect that they're going to draw the right one. Right.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't know I'm not an expert in the government of India or how a lot of the politics and everything work in India and even elsewhere. I'm not an expert in that. I focus on the cyber side. So the best that we can do on the cybersecurity side is to provide the evidence on the technical level and allow others that are more capable and knowledgeable on that side of the house to take that and connect the dots with the political side and the actual real world impact.
Right. Makes sense. You're a support arm of maybe some folks that you're not even loosely affiliated with, basically, but they'll have this evidence out there to be able to work with and do what they do. It makes total sense. Was there anything surprising that jumped out at you while you were doing this research? Anything that revealed itself that took you by surprise?
Yeah, I think back to almost your last question was the simplicity of these attacks. A lot of this was something that we think could have been easily caught over the last decade when they've been operating, doing the same stuff. But it's so, from a technical perspective, it's so boring. It's not interesting at all if you don't have that background context of what they're doing on the end objective. Yeah. So being able to, research this and connect the dots to the greater story was pretty shocking. We were seeing a potentially state-sponsored actor doing something so technically unsavvy for something has such a massive impact in real world lives. That was shocking to me, and it really opened my eyes and gave me a lot of empathy for those that are been targeted and impacted by this. We see people that are currently jailed or have received life sentences for something that may be tied to this scenario. So shocking on that front alone.
Right. And do you think that was strategically and intentional? Like, did they keep it mundane because it would help them fly under the radar?
It's definitely possible. And I would theorize it's more that they are not a technically savvy organization. Rather than them being so savvy that they're deliberately doing this, I think it's more likely that they are just actually not savvy. Yeah, everything from the exploits they're using, the phishing techniques, the malware being used, and even how they set up their infrastructure. Having infrastructure overlaps over a decade, I mean, that's a massive operational security failure,
blunder,
in my opinion.
For sure.
So yeah, exactly. So I think, you combine all of that, you can put together the greater story of them just being so focused on their mission of getting on these devices and, arresting these individuals that they don't really care about getting caught. And for the most part, they were very successful. We just got lucky being able to get that actual data from a victim device to kick off this whole thing. So yeah, I'm pretty sure there's more out there doing the same.
Right. Yeah, makes sense. And to that point, so you were talking about the exploits they use. The infection attempt section of the report talks about 4 CVEs that were repeatedly used for dropping and executing malware. Were these new CVEs at the time, or had they been in play for a while? Tell us a little bit about that.
All of the CVEs that they've used were all in play for at least a couple of months. I believe at one point they began using one once they got a lot of media attention after POC came out. And I believe that was close to 6 months or so that we began seeing their phishing campaigns making use of that vulnerability. We never saw anything where it was a 0-day or even less than 30-day CVE. It was all pretty old stuff. And honestly, I think that speaks to their sophistication, but also that it still worked in many cases. These individuals were not operating like a security savvy business. These are personal devices in many cases they're targeting. Yeah. So, they missed an update for a couple of weeks or missed the Patch Tuesday once, and they're an open target at that point. So yeah, nothing really noteworthy on the vulnerability side or the exploit side. I think if anything, the use and shift of malware kind of tells more of a story of how driven they were to evolve.
Yeah, it makes sense for sure. One of the things that kind of jumped out at me is, as I reviewed the report, it just seemed like for whatever ingenuity that they did have, it pretty much lied in their delivery of the malware. So if you could take us through that, how did they deliver the malware? What level of effort did they put into making sure it got to their intended targets? Maybe just talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, great question. So this group has been particularly persistent throughout their campaigns. What they do is they create a malicious Office document. In many cases, it was .doc, or we saw them using RAR encrypted archives that contain a .doc, and in many cases they just contain a macro that will then pop the machine through one of those exploits and ultimately deliver the rat of choice or keylogger, depending on the campaign. And their campaigns of phishing individuals was extremely persistent, where we see them create lure emails containing themes that were very relevant to that individual, such as an activism topic or something very relevant to what that individual is focused on in terms of activism or legal cases or research opportunities and so forth. And those campaigns were conducted almost, in some cases, multiple times a week. And in even rarer cases, we saw the same campaign spread across multiple individuals the same day, even using the same malware. So it wasn't particularly advanced, so to say, but they were very motivated and very persistent, where they're even using the same lure documents and same emails and just re-forwarding it back to get back to the top of the inbox, just hoping that they get open. Gotcha. So I think their persistence really is highlighted there, as I mentioned, but the advanced side isn't quite there, and it really speaks to what is an APT a lot too.
Yeah, they definitely have the P covered.
Yes, definitely.
Awesome. So in the weapons of choice section of the report, it says, and this kind of follows the theme of what we've been talking about. It says the malware used is I'm quoting here, unsophisticated and downright mundane. So you had mentioned the NetWire and Dark Comet payloads, right? Can you talk just a little bit about what those payloads are, what they were using them for, any context you can share there?
Yeah, absolutely. So Dark Comet was one of the first rats they used. It's a remote access Trojan. It's commercially available. There's hacked versions of it available on GitHub, things like that. So really basic rat, pretty straightforward to detect if you have any half decent detection capability. You should be able to catch it. And then they eventually shifted over to being focused on using NetWire, which is, again, a commercially available rat. It's used by a lot of crimeware actors, APTs alike. It's very effective, but it ultimately provides, remote access to a victim machine. And neither of those have ever been heavily modified in this case, where they're trying to really evade detection. They're really just kind of like using what's easy and super effective malware to get in. Mm-hmm. The more unsophisticated part of it was when we saw early campaigns of theirs making use of a very basic keylogger. I believe we called it like Incubator Keylogger. It was extremely simple and amateurish in my opinion, and basically that keylogger would set up an SMTP server and email out the keylogs, and the email credentials that it was sending out to or sending out from, and then the recipient of those were all just obfuscated in the actual sample itself. So in the report, we actually highlight all the different samples and all the emails they sent from and to, and it helped connect a lot of dots between a lot of the different campaigns because of overlapping keyloggers, and then that overlapping that keylogger email with the NetWire email and all this stuff. So they made a lot of like very amateurish OPSEC mistakes there.
Yeah.
But you combine all of that with, then we saw an additional Android, in very few rare cases, saw an Android malware that was more of a crimeware type toolkit you can buy online. And it is pretty similar to a generic rat, but just for an Android device. And that was shipped in phishing emails with the NetWire samples at the same time. And again, more overlap, more infrastructure that helped connect the dots between the whole decade of activity. So yeah. Pretty interesting.
Yeah. And so that unsophisticated label is really comes down to the fact there was no attempt made whatsoever to really hide what they were doing, basically. No evasion attempts whatsoever.
Exactly. Yeah. Unsophisticated, but to kind of reiterate it, they're extremely effective. Like they showed, case in point, that you don't have to be advanced to be able to succeed in the cyber domain, especially when it's against, regular people, activists, right, and people that aren't technically savvy, so to say. So it worked. It was boring from our perspective, but it worked.
Yeah, and the targets of choice definitely has a bearing on this, right, and their ability to be effective as a result. Makes total sense. The keyloggers you mentioned just a minute ago, you called it the Incubator Keylogger. Not the least bit technically impressive. And built in such a brittle fashion that they no longer function, with some of the quotes that I pulled out of the report.
Yeah.
This kind of seems to coincide first off with the overall theme of like lack of sophistication, but in addition to that, you had stated like their primary objective was planting evidence, right? So were you not all that surprised that, they didn't have a bunch of advanced data exfiltration techniques, right? It sort of made sense to me, I think.
Yeah, I think it makes sense, and it speaks to, I think their overall mission didn't require it, and they knew it, but they, we see Indian APTs, like Sidewinder, that kind of has some overlaps here, which I'm sure we'll talk about. They are making use of a bit more technically savvy attack techniques. They know what they can do and what the options are. In this case, I think they just simply knew that, it is not necessary and will be successful anyway. And I think it proved in this case that they are, especially when you look at the end results of some of these arrests. So yeah, I think it speaks a lot to their overall objective and maybe where they prioritize this from potentially a state-sponsored like overall mission.
Yeah, for sure. Coming back to the Android Trojan you mentioned a few minutes ago, in the report it says that it was actually delivered in some of the same phishing emails as the NetWire payload. Is that an unusual tactic to put multiple payloads in the same email? And
yeah, that's a great question. It is pretty unusual, and it really is kind of like for my opinion, like a spray and pray approach. Like they're just shooting these phishing emails out constantly, and they're like, you know what? Let's include we're not able to compromise this guy. We don't know what's going on. Maybe let's throw an Android malware in there as well and see if they open that and run it, because they're potentially reading emails on an Android device. And so yeah, it was a very few rare cases they did that, and it may have been experimenting, it may have been they were getting desperate to try and get this single target, but for the most part that is pretty rare, because it adds so much more complexity to an adversary trying to cover their tracks. You know, if you start including secondary malware with secondary infrastructure, it's allowing somebody on the defender side or researching side to be able to link even more. And potentially they don't even care to get caught. They maybe even knew they were going to get caught one day, or were just disregarding that opportunity or even considering it. So rare, but not ultimately that surprising in this scenario.
Yeah, gotcha. And I think he already commented on this. We'll revisit it just in case, that the level of sophistication of that Android Trojan, like you mentioned, it was off the shelf stuff, no modifications made, just pull it in, plug it in, and spray and pray, like you said.
Yeah, the Android sample itself is a basic rat type functionality. I believe that we mentioned in the report, but I believe it was freely available on or being sold on a few darknet websites, and nothing very sophisticated. It was detection wise on the mobile side is pretty straightforward on any sort of Android detection system. So nothing sophisticated there. And it is worth noting as well on the mobile side that some of the victims in one case, Rona Wilson, his iPhone was actually infected with NSO Group's Pegasus, or not Pegasus. It was the NSO Group malware Pegasus, and that was caught within the backup of his infected device that was being analyzed by Arsenal Consulting. So there was a very particular mobile capability or function to this whole operation as well. And perhaps ModifiedElephant was trying to use their own mobile component while also hiring NSO Group to do some stuff as well.
Makes sense. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. Really quick, just coming back to that, with the mobile component of this, what kind of capabilities did they get from that Trojan, the Android Trojan? Was it anything? I mean, obviously they were getting some benefit from deploying it, even if it was a bit mundane or unsophisticated. So was it just like tracking somebody's location, monitoring calls, text messages, things like that?
Yeah, I believe this Android sample was isolated to pretty much just information collection. And I think they're more interested on the email side, plus any sort of post-compromise actions like running further binaries, beaconing outbound, providing remote access. So it may have been very, very mundane and really simple kind of remote access capabilities. But the fact that they were able to do further post-compromise actions on it kind of speaks to it as being potentially like a first stage malware, where they wanted to do GPS tracking or, any sort of like watching the camera type stuff, they could add that on. And that's not to say this sample couldn't do that right off the bat, but I think its simplicity and so forth really kind of wasn't, it was more focused on just getting in and getting the information collected and potentially compromising email accounts at that point.
Yeah, gotcha. Yeah, let's talk about. I think you alluded to this a little bit with Sidewinder. There's a section of the report called "Relations to Other Threat Clusters," and it says that the team couldn't disambiguate the shape of ModifiedElephant's relationship with some of the other threat actors. Talk about that for us a little bit. What does your gut tell you? Are you confident that with time the relationship will reveal itself? Give us some insight there.
Yeah, so that section of the report is something that I find probably the most fascinating piece of our research. It introduces so many mysteries and challenges so many theories to some of these APTs. So to give some context, what we found was a cluster of activity that we call ModifiedElephant over the last decade, and very particular pieces of that campaign overlap with other actors that we know are Indian APTs or Indian state-sponsored groups that are doing something similar. So we have Sidewinder. I've reported on them in previous jobs, and they have a long history of reporting throughout the industry. They're more known for being an Indian state-sponsored APT that does more political espionage or your traditional CNE type ops outside of India, not domestically, going against other governments and so forth. That was a link between them was interesting because what we saw was some of the emails, some of these victims of ModifiedElephant had phishing emails come in that were also timed very coincidentally with ModifiedElephant emails, but they were coming from the Sidewinder APT, and we're able to link that up based off of the phishing infrastructure and so forth used in the campaigns. So that highlighted a potential relationship between Sidewinder and ModifiedElephant. Coordination, perhaps, or perhaps some sort of shared mission by an overarching entity, aka the government. So that was really interesting. And that was just one piece. We also had something similar with obviously the NSO group phishing emails or NSO group samples being found on the victim devices and so forth. So there's a lot of threads to be pulled there. I think what our working theory at this point is that ModifiedElephant is potentially a sub-team of this government and shares an overall mission with multiple APTs in that region. And they are potentially making use of their own in-house team and then outside sources such as NSO Group. And, we see potential links to even Finn Fisher way back, as I mentioned in there as well. And yeah, it really speaks to the complexity of attribution and speaks to the complexity of trying to organize how these actors are related from an outsider's perspective based off of what we know happened. There's stuff we don't know that happened out there that really may clear things up. So to answer your question, I think time will definitely tell. The cyber paleontology aspect to our industry may come to light where we are able to eventually find some samples or get some new insight into these intrusions that really connect the dots for us. As of right now, it's kind of a mystery, but we can really build a lot of assumptions and theories around how these guys are related just based off of what we found in the report itself. So yeah, it's an amazing aspect to it, and my most interesting caveat or note to the whole report.
Yeah, you had a nice little segue in there too. Let's go ahead and talk about attribution. Can you summarize the finding for us, or what you're comfortable summarizing?
Yeah, absolutely. So at this point, what we have is significant evidence that the ModifiedElephant actor has operated throughout the last 10 years targeting these individuals, and we're able to connect their campaigns to a lot of Indian APTs. Based off of the connection to other APTs, the connection to other known intrusions, combined with the evidence planting, and then how that evidence was used in very closely coordinated arrests following that evidence being planted, and then the overall coordination between the arrests and how that evidence was used, plus against previous campaigns across multiple victims, we can pretty confidently say that this is an adversary that is operating with state support. We don't know to what extent that means. Is it the same arresting entity? Is it somebody they've hired? Is it somebody that is, potentially disgruntled with these individuals that's tipping off the arresting entities? There's a lot of mystery there, but there's enough close coordination to say that there is some relationship there. And again, hopefully time will tell on that front.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. You think it's possible that anything about this report that you've published could potentially influence the outcome of the cases, the arrests made?
Yeah, it's definitely possible. We're looking at what we found. I don't think is going to be used in a court case because of we're not following chain of custody and the things we're looking at. We're taking publicly available information and building our story. I hope what we provided publicly can then be used by the defense team or others that are being targeted that aren't a part of this current defense team to help build their case. If it provides enough information for them to get their story put together and their truth out, I think that would be amazing. However, it speaks, I think, again, like we talked about earlier, we're in the cyber domain. My expertise isn't in the legal case. I hope it provides them enough information to help impact it, but there's a lot of unknowns. There's maybe a lot of things that aren't public that I just don't know about that may prove these cases to be true, not evidence planted. But hopefully time will tell. And yeah.
Yeah. Hopefully it does. I mean, at the very least, you put the effort out, and like you said, it informs some folks who can then go do the bits that require the chain of custody and everything else that's necessary to introduce it as case file, right?
Yeah. And kind of to that point, what we're doing on the research side is not to toot my own horn or anything, but it's a rare skill set that these defense teams and these people being targeted usually have no insight into.
Yeah, or access to, right?
Exactly. So hopefully we do some good on getting this information out. I hope they're able to use it, or I hope I'm proven wrong in some cases, but I just hope the truth comes out based off of what we found. Yeah,
exactly. Do you feel like you're taking on any personal risk by attaching your name to a report like this?
Yeah, good question. Security researchers have been targeted in the past. Being an American citizen, I feel I'm on the lucky end of the stick here. I think there's some risk, but I think I almost look at it as my responsibility to use my skill set for good. So I don't think there's very much risk. However, it's not something completely out of the blue. It's possible, but I think more on the cyber side. Things like that rather than physical harm, but it's definitely something that crosses our mind often.
Yeah. But like you said, being if you were in India, an Indian citizen, for example, trying to put out a report like this, you might feel a bit differently about it. But given that you have the veil of the American government in front of you, right? It might afford enough protection to.
Yeah, absolutely. You look at researchers trying to do similar things outside of the U.S. and they are faced with a lot more challenges. So again, I think I just love highlighting how lucky I am to be doing what I'm doing where I'm doing it.
Yeah. Any additional lessons learned you'd feel compelled to share?
Yeah, great question. I think, activists in general, like we've already mentioned, aren't often extremely technically savvy. However, I think what this case shows is they really need to in today's world, take a very deliberate effort in understanding what an adversary is capable of doing against them, especially when they are very outspoken to an authoritative regime or anything like that. They're often very motivated to silence you. So I think activists and human rights defenders and anyone supporting those organizations really need to take care in protecting their personal security on the cyber front. And yeah, so I hope this serves as an example. There's many resources out there. EFF has some stuff, and there's more stuff I've tweeted out that you can definitely check out. But yeah, something for anybody that is working in that world to carefully consider.
Yeah, be aware of the resources that are available to you, Citizen Lab and some of these other folks, right?
Yes.
Yeah, that's a great point. Let's jump into a rapid fire round real quick. I'm just gonna lob some questions at you. Just rattle off whatever comes to mind first.
Okay.
Actually, didn't have this one written down, but it did occur to me while we were talking. First rapid fire question: do you think you'll revisit ModifiedElephant at any point in the future?
Definitely.
Yeah, I suspect so. All right, editors: VI, Nano, Emacs, or something else?
Ooh, Nano.
Oh, wow.
I know.
Awesome. But to each his own, right? That's why we got to know these things.
Yeah.
Search engine preference: Google, Bing, DuckDuckGo, or something else?
Ooh, preferably DuckDuckGo, but let's be real, usually Google.
Exactly. It just ends up being the default for some reason.
Yeah.
Hilarious. All right, lunch choice: fish tacos or burgers?
Burgers, for sure.
All right, and if burgers, flame broiled or flat top?
Flame broiled.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, gotta have that char, huh?
Oh, yeah.
Love it. I think you kind of talked about this a little bit earlier, but sum it up for me. Are you doing your life's work?
Absolutely. I could not agree more with that.
Love it. Yeah, that's great. Definitely, we were talking before we started the recording about how this is more than a full-time job, right? and to be able to keep up with that, it really has to be a pursuit of passion, right?
Yes, absolutely. And thanks to the family for being able to support that. It's not easy in many cases. I'm sure you're well aware.
Yeah, for sure. I think you talked about this too. Do you feel a sense of obligation given your skill set to be doing what you're doing?
Yeah, I do. A sense of obligation to use our unique skill set in the industry to try and help others and support our customers and targets of these type of attackers.
Yeah, likewise. What would you be doing if not in the cybersecurity field?
Ooh, good question. I would probably be in some sort of landscape design or some sort of design stuff. I love making things really pretty looking. Architecture
of some sort, yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, that makes sense. Well, let's wrap it up. Shout outs. Any up and coming cybersecurity researchers you want to shout out as a show of support?
Yeah, there's honestly too many to name. Anybody that I've worked with over the last couple of years has been great. Except my friends over at Lacework, my SentinelLabs team. Also, so many experienced and new people on both teams that too many to name for sure.
Awesome. How about friends, family, or coworkers? I mean, you kind of covered it there with the coworkers bit. You mentioned earlier you're getting a ton of support from the fam to do what you do. Any specific folks you'd call out in that?
No, I think, my colleague Jags helped me on this report and did an amazing additions to it. And I think his support and the rest of my team really took this to the finish line and really helped build the story and make the impact, hopefully. So yeah, thanks to all them.
Awesome. And charity or foundation, you kind of talked about the EFF, and is there any charitable functions or foundations that you like to spread awareness on?
Oh, EFF is, always a go-to, but anything helping climate change, can't complain about too.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. How about for future Havoc podcast episode, any specific topics or guest interview that you'd like to see on the show?
Yeah. I think a lot of the stuff happening with the log, or that has happened with the Log4j would be interesting, getting some insiders on that. Otherwise, any of the latest intrusions, everything, Ukraine, as we talked about, Ukraine has been my big focus. So any insight into research on Ukraine wipers or anything like that would be, I think, an amazing topic to highlight.
Awesome. We'll add it to the list. Good stuff. Well, we want to make sure that we give everybody an option that comes on the show for the choice of a hoodie or a hat, some Havoc swag. But since you're actually the very first participant, you're our first guest, I'm going to make sure you get swagged out completely. You'll get a hoodie, a hat, T-shirts, like Havoc swag for life, man. I got you covered.
All right, finally, I get some new clothes.
Well,
Thank you.
awesome.
No, thank you. Though. I appreciate it. It's great to be on here. It's awesome to be the first person to interview, but I think there's a bright future ahead for the podcast. I look forward to it.
Yeah, well, you've been a great sport. If you're up for it, the invitation stands. Come back anytime. I'd love to have you on, talk about more reports as they come. I've seen you already turned out a couple of others, and I'm sure you got a lot more in your future. So we'd love to have you back. It was a great show. Really appreciate the fantastic conversation, Tom.
Thanks, Tom. I appreciate it. It's been great being here.
All right. Awesome. Take care, and we'll go ahead and wrap it up. Thanks a bunch.
All right. Thank you.